Hi, welcome to week 16. If you're watching this, that means that you are in my English 10 class and you are gone either one or multiple days. This is the week coming back to school after winter break, so welcome back. As always, if you have any questions about what you see in the slides in the video, just let me know. But we are going to be starting a new unit. So, first off, I just want to say I hope that you had a really awesome and refreshing break. I know that we were all kind of feeling a little bit burnt out and tired and just needing some time off. And so I hope that whatever you did gave you energy, that you were able to rest, do something fun. And I am very excited to see you again. I did miss you. So let's get to it. We are going to be starting a poetry unit. And I know that brings up lots of feelings, mixed emotions for most of us. Um, and I'll explain how this is going to go. I think it'll be different than a typical poetry unit that you've had before. I know that some of you had me last year, and we did do poetry last year, although that was when we were still online with distance learning. We weren't in person yet. So some of this will be a little bit repetitive, but we're going to be adding some new things to this unit that will make it better. We're going to kind of bulk it up a little bit, and they'll give you some opportunities to do some things that you didn't do last year if you had me last year. So this is the schedule for this week. But to start off, I want to do a warm-up writing prompt. I want you to tell me one high and one low. So one high meaning something positive that happened over the break, and one low maybe something not so great. Kind of a mixture of both, because that's what life is. So you'll go ahead and write that down on this slide. Okay, the next thing we need to do is take this poetry survey. This is going to give me an idea as to where you stand with poetry right now, because I know there's kind of a spectrum. Some people absolutely love it and some people hate it with everything in them. And I want to know where you fall. So if the QR code isn't working for some reason, you can also go on Canvas and click the link that's in week 17, I think is the week we're in, week 16, week 16. So go ahead, pause this video and fill that out for me. Okay, so let me give you a few things to consider before we really dive into this. I want you to know that I know that poetry, for some reason, is like I said, it's a love-hate type things. Either you love it or you hate it. There doesn't really seem to be a middle ground very much with people. So if you are thinking to yourself, Miss Albritton, I really don't like poetry. I've never been good at it. It's not my thing. It's confusing to me. I don't understand it. It feels like a foreign language. I understand that. Poetry is a very specific thing within language arts, and I want you to just try your best to be creative and to have fun. In terms of like our grade and the things I'm going to be assessing you on, I'm not going to assess you too hard. I'm not going to scrutinize you too hard in terms of like the content that you're writing, because you're going to do much more writing than you are reading in this unit. And I just want you to kind of don't approach it as if you're already going to fail, because I don't want you to be concerned with getting a bad grade. I just want you to enjoy the process and to try and to have fun and put your best foot forward. You're not always going to produce good things with writing. I love poetry. I am a language arts teacher, and sometimes I write stuff that sucks, just flat out. So I want you to think about that and approach this unit with an open mind if you're feeling already kind of like not super excited about it. So push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And if you get anxious or frustrated or something's just not clicking, I want you to ask yourself, what is the worst thing that could happen? Because literally, not much. The worst thing that could happen is you write a crappy poem and then you move on with your life, right? So it's not a life or death situation. I just want you to take the pressure off yourself if you're feeling kind of like this is not really your thing. Okay, so to give you an overview of how this unit's going to work, it's going to take place in two parts. You're going to look at it poetry as a reader and poetry as a writer. So before we can write poetry ourselves, we need to look at it from a reader's perspective. So this will give us an opportunity to look at different types of poems, to look at different types of published poets and what they've come up with. And we're going to get some groundwork in terms of understanding the basics, the fundamentals. What are poetic devices? What's figurative language? All the things, the tools and techniques that are used in poetry. And then you will have the opportunity to create a poetry portfolio where you're just going to try. You're going to try to write some poems. They'll be different from each other, and we'll kind of do this in a workshop setting where it's very low stakes. You can give some feedback to peers. They can give you ideas, and it's going to be really fun. So for the first part of today, which will be, or first part of this video, which would be Monday's day, these are the questions we're going to answer. What is poetry? What makes a poem? And why is it awesome? So these are some of the things. I won't get into it now because that's what we're going to do, but you can quickly glance at this. These are going to be the things that we're going to look at in part 1, viewing poetry from a reader's perspective. And then just to give you a heads up, later when we start writing our own when we start analyzing poetry a little bit deeper than just kind of reading it and looking, oh, okay, that's what a haiku is, whatever. We're going to do something called the Big Six, where you're going to analyze and discuss poetry 21st century in a 21st century model. So you'll read a poem twice, and then you'll go through these 6 and basically answer the questions to what they're talking about: the title, speaker, paraphrase, tools, turns, and theme. By doing this, it gives you a very good understanding as to how to analyze a poem in a deeper way and how to do it in a way that's not overwhelming. And then this might look familiar to you. If you remember way back when, at the beginning of the school year, when I did an intro to our grammar lessons, you should maybe recall this in the back of your memory somewhere. I told you, or I gave you this metaphor of looking at grammar and how when you are looking at sports, there are things that are not interesting, but they're necessary. Those things are a scoreboard, a referee, the lines on the court or on the field, the people keeping stats in a book. All that stuff is really boring and no one really cares about it when you look at it by itself. But those are all things that are important in order to play the game and have fun. And I told you that in terms of grammar. That's what grammar is. You have to know those things in order to actually enjoy reading and writing. And the same thing applies with this first part of our poetry unit. When we're looking at devices and figurative language and types of poetry, it's not necessarily, well, for some of you it might be. I think it's interesting. For some of you, it might not be super interesting in and of itself, but we have to know those things first before we can actually read poetry and write it ourselves. So think about that metaphor again. Okay, so to get started, I want you to tell me what you know. You can just fill in the blanks. I want you to tell me poetry is blank. I think poetry is blank, and based off my prior knowledge, poetry is blank. So take a minute, pause this video, and answer those questions for me. Okay, the next thing we're going to do after you kind of brainstormed a little bit, we're going to watch this TED Ed video called What Makes a Poem a Poem. They're going to cover a lot in this video in a short amount of time, but I want you to do your best to pay attention, and then after you watch the video, you will answer this slide by telling me the top 3 things that you learned or thought were interesting after watching that video. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so we learned that there's many things that make a poem, and I'm sure you had time to write those things down. But now we need to ask ourselves the question, why is poetry so incredible? And you'll notice on your copy of the slides, anytime that there's an empty box, that means you need to fill it in with whatever information you see on my screen. So what makes it so incredible? Well, several things. You can say a lot in very little space and very little time, very few words. You have the freedom to be creative. You're going to see that there are many different types of poetry, and poetry in some regards can be very awesome in the fact that there's a lot of liberty that you can take with what you make and call a poem. For some of us, it might be a little more frustrating because you want more structure, but we'll talk about that in the rest of the video. You'll be happy to know that poetry doesn't always have to rhyme. I think sometimes if you kind of get a bad taste of poetry, when you're younger, it's because you think it's just Dr. Seuss rhymes and that's it, like kitty book rhymes, but that is not the case, and you'll definitely see some examples. And then again, the genre is just super diverse. There's lots of different poems, lots of different ways you can write them. They look differently, like visually on the paper. So this is an example from Morgan Harper Nichols. If you follow her on social media, that's where she has most of her stuff. She does have things published, but she puts a lot of stuff on social media. And this is one of my favorite poems from her. So take a second and read that. So what else? What's another question we need to ask? What does poetry look like? Well, it can look like this, kind of like the poem I just showed you, just a couple lines on a page, not taking up a lot of space. Poetry can look like this. I've shown you some of these before, not the Jacqueline Woodson book, but you'll notice with um, young adult literature, verse novels, I mean, just in general, but specifically with young adult literature, verse novels are becoming very, very popular, and that's where you write a book and every chapter is a poem, and all the poems together create a story. So I've already given you the book talk for Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. That was one of our first Chapter Friday books. And Jacqueline Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming is an autobiography of her childhood in verse. So speaking of Jason Reynolds, I want you to take a look at this video. We're going to ask ourselves, why are we learning poetry? Why does it matter? Why should you care? Because I hope by now you would know that I don't ever want to waste your time. I mean, I really shouldn't. It's my job not to waste your time. It's my job to teach you things that are important and beneficial to you. So you're going to take a look at this video, and in the box on your slide, describe the metaphor that Jason Reynolds uses to describe why poetry is beneficial, especially for reluctant readers, students that don't love reading. So go ahead and take a look at that video. Next, we have another example of what poetry looks like, and that is with Brandon Leake. Brandon Leake is a America's Got Talent winner. He won, I think, 2 years ago now, like right before the pandemic or right at the beginning of it. And he won for being a poet, for writing poetry and for performing it, and it's very powerful. So I want you to watch this video. This is a clip of his audition, and after you watch it, you're going to answer these questions. 3 things. One thing you noticed, one thing you liked, and a question that you have. So go ahead, pause this video, and watch Brandon Leake's audition video. Okay, so that concludes day 1 of this week, which would be Monday. I want you to kind of give me some concluding thoughts so far based off of everything we've talked about and the notes that you've taken. What is an aha moment? Maybe something that you had a previous assumption about poetry and something that you learned today kind of changed that, or maybe made you think about it in a different way. And then one thing that you're still wondering, a question that you might still have. Okay, so for Wednesday, it's of course a late start day. So we're going to do something that I was honestly just planning on doing with my juniors, and I started that process with them before break, but I really think this would benefit us as well. So we are going to create an English goal, and we're going to use the SMART method, which is this acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. You are going to pick something within the English subject that you struggle with, something that you want to get better at, something that's confusing or frustrating for you. And I'm going to do my best to kind of partner with you to work with you one-on-one. Now, it's going to be quite a venture for me because I have, including my juniors, I think 180 something students. And I really, other than like giving you something specific to focus on, one of my main reasons for having us do this little project is that I want to give you an experience that you would have in school, that in like a smaller school where you can talk to your teacher, you can ask them questions, you feel seen and heard. And so we're going to do that with this activity. So you're going to create a goal, but first let me describe what a SMART goal is. This is the acronym, the words, and I want to give you a non-academic example so you can kind of see what I'm getting at. So when you're writing a goal, the reason I'm having you use this SMART template is because I need it to be very specific and detailed and relevant and attainable and time-based, everything that's in the acronym. So here's a non-academic example, and I just picked volleyball because that's something I'm knowledgeable about and passionate about. So let's say I play on a team, and this is my goal for the season. By the end of the regular season, I will have 10 kills per game by taking stats during scrimmage games, in practice, and league games. So you'll notice, based off of the color coding that I did, this shows you how I've made it a SMART goal. Specific meaning you need to give me a very specific goal that you're trying to attain. I want to have 10 kills. That means 10 hits in a game where I score points. Measurable, how are you going to actually keep track of that? By taking stats. I say that right here. Attainable, that means it needs to be realistic. So I'm saying not 10 kills per first set in a game, but 10 kills per game. So as a total. Relevant, meaning it has to be on topic. So it has to be, in your case, English related. So I said during scrimmage games, practice games, and time-based by the end of the regular season. So for you, think about, do you want to meet your goal by the end of the school year, by the end of the first 6 weeks of second semester? You decide. So you are going to write one goal, and if you look on this slide, you can see some ideas. These are English-related topics. Maybe you want to get better at vocabulary. Maybe you want to get better at prepping to write an essay or punctuation or researching for an essay. So it's totally up to you what you pick, but it has to be English-related. With my juniors, when they started this before Christmas break, I had a few that said, I want to get better at turning my work in on time, and while that is a very admirable goal, it's not what I'm looking for because it's not English specific. That's just kind of like time management, not being a procrastinator. So I want you to think more along the lines of this. What is something within English that you want to get better at? So you are going to write that goal down. If you're gone on Wednesday when we do this, I'm going to give you a handout. And so you just need to ask me for that when you come back because it's not in the slides. Okay, this is day 3 for week 16, which would be Friday. So to do a very quick recap after we started looking at some poetry notes. Poetry is a genre of writing that includes specific poetic devices, and it's a way to express very vivid emotions and ideas in a way that's creative. So the questions we're going to answer today are, what are the elements and devices used, and how does understanding those things help us to analyze poetry and interpret meaning from it? So this is just a quick snapshot of what we're going to talk about today. We are going to look at figurative language first, and there's more than just 6 types of figurative language, but these are definitely the most common. So that's what we're going to focus on: similes, metaphors, personification, oxymoron, hyperbole, and idioms. So what I want you to do is tell me what you know right now. If you don't know, say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, but maybe it's this. I don't want you to just go to Google and copy and paste because I can easily tell when you do that. Just tell me, honestly, what do you know right now? It's going to help me figure out what we need to kind of focus more on. So you'll type in each box here. Okay, so to start, we're going to start with similes. This is very common, probably one of the easier ones to remember. It's when you are comparing something using another thing, or you are comparing something with another thing using like or as. So we'll talk about this more, but I found this video that talks about similes in songs. We're going to talk about the connection between poetry and music probably in a week or 2. So click this video and watch the first couple seconds. You don't have to watch the whole thing, but you'll get the idea of how often similes are used in music. And then next we have metaphor. Metaphors are kind of like a simile, but a little different. So you are comparing 2 objects to show how they're similar, but you're doing it in the form of you are, or excuse me, the form of to be. So you are, she is, it's that form of the verb. The comparison is going to add some description to the object, some depth to it. So some examples that you can see are the bullet points. Laughter is the best medicine. She's just a late bloomer. His heart of stone surprised me. There's many different examples here, and what I want you to do is take a look at this video, these lyrics to a Michael Bublé song, and see how many metaphors you can count, because there's quite a bit in this song. So go ahead and do that. Okay, next is personification. This is when you are describing something that is not living. It's an inanimate object, but you're giving it human characteristics or qualities. So some examples would be lightning danced across the sky. Excuse me, the wind howled, and in the night the car complained as the key was roughly turned into its ignition. Keep going down the list. All of these things are inanimate objects: lightning, wind, a car, pie, an alarm clock, but we're describing them in a way as if they're alive, like a human, living being. So that's personification. Next is oxymoron. This is when you bring together two contradictory words to make a specific effect. So these are some very big examples. Big baby and open secret. If something is open and something's a secret, those are two opposites. If something's open, that means people see it, it's visible. Secret obviously means you're keeping something hidden. So those are some examples. Next, we have hyperbole. This one is when you are giving an extreme exaggeration or emphasis in describing something. And again, with all figurative language, it's not meant to be taken literally. And in this case, definitely not. So with The Office and Parks and Rec, you will see lots of hyperboles used. World's Best Boss, Chris Traeger gives a lot in the show. So you can take a look at that if you want to see some more examples. And then we have idioms. Idioms are a little bit harder to outline and define, just in terms of like how they are dependent on culture, I would say, and language specifically. So these are phrases that people use just kind of in their everyday communication. And the phrases are definitely not meant to be taken literally. So an example would be, oh, someone says, "This was a total blessing in disguise." That means that there was a good thing that seemed bad at first. If you've ever heard somebody say, "break a leg," to somebody that's involved in theater, it doesn't mean they literally want you to break your leg. It means that they wish you good luck. So a lot of these are very specific to culture and maybe where you live globally. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint specifically because it's just very dependent on that, but you can take a look at that list to give you some ideas. Okay, so this next part, you will need a physical handout. So if you're gone on Friday, you can still do this. You're just gonna have to like add a slide. But and again, we'll touch way more on music and the connection to that probably next week. But I want you to know that with figurative language, you're gonna find that it's everywhere. It's in writing all the time, but music especially, because there's just something about being able to describe an experience or something that you're going through in a way that you need to use figurative language to do it. And there's definitely one music artist that uses figurative language all the time, and we're going to learn from her, and that is Miss Taylor Swift. So we're going to look at two of her songs and looking at the lyrics, and I want you to highlight on your handout, or if you're doing this online, just add a slide and tell me what you find. So the two songs are Enchanted, you can Google it, or And Willow. So you're going to look at those two songs, look at the lyrics, and then tell me what you find. So I'll pause, give you a second to do that. Okay, so let's start with Enchanted first. These are some of the things that you should have found. I don't know if I caught all of them, but this is definitely most. So she uses personification, meaning you are talking about an inanimate object in a way that makes it more human-like. She uses similes and hyperboles. And then for her song Willow, we see idioms, similes, and metaphors. So you can take a look at this, pause this video, and see if it matched up with what you found. But it's pretty interesting. This is not just something that Taylor Swift does. I would say I would make a bet that every single person that has ever produced any music at all in the history of forever has used figurative language at least once. There's just no way that that's not the case. So, I'm just showing you Taylor Swift songs because she uses it quite frequently. Okay, we'll speed through this last bit because some of the stuff we talked about at the beginning of the year with our quick little short story unit that we did. So, with repetition, this is literally when you are repeating words or sounds to create a rhythmical effect. It's as simple as that. So, in this example, you can see that. Alliteration is when you are taking the first letter or the sound in the beginning of a word and you're repeating it one after another to create a pattern. So, this is an example from Edgar Allan Poe. He is a 20th century poet and he wrote a poem called The Raven. This is a famous example. Imagery is when you are using a combination of figurative language and poetic devices to paint a picture in the reader's mind. So you're trying to make it so that they can easily imagine what you are talking about. This is one of my favorite poems ever. I was shown this poem, I believe, in college, maybe high school. I can't remember. This is a poem written by Wilfred Owen. He was a World War I soldier and he actually died in the war, like right before it ended, because of some injuries that he received. But he wrote this poem called Dulce et decorum est, which is Latin for "it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country." And it's very intense in terms of like the imagery that he's using, but it gives you a very good idea of what it was like to be a soldier in World War I. So take a look at that, read that. Next, we have symbolism. These pictures should look maybe familiar to you. These are specific objects that are used to represent an idea or a topic. It could be colors, shapes, objects, kind of varies. You'll remember that we looked at this at the beginning of the year, tone and mood. These are the emotions and the feelings that the writer intends the reader to feel. So if you remember when we watched this clip, we watched it twice, once with no sound and once with. And we kind of talked about how the music in this horror movie definitely changes the tone and mood when you're watching this opening scene or ending scene. And then onomatopoeia is a very long word and hard to spell, but it means words that describe sounds. So things like this that you might see in a comic book, snap, crackle, pop for Rice Krispies. These are describing sounds, words to mimic that. So what I want you to do in your own words is to recap for me, what is the difference between these two? Is there a difference? And if there is, what do you think it is? So you're going to write that in this middle box. Okay, the last thing that I want to show us, this is the last thing for week 16. If you're pursuing honors credit for English 10, I have an assignment that you can choose to do. It's pretty easy. I think it's really fun. It's called the Figurative Language Scavenger Hunt. So this is going to be where you are going to try to find an example of figurative language being used in real life, meaning kind of basically in things that you use for entertainment. So here's an example from The Office. I tried to talk to Toby to be his friend, but that is like trying to be friends with an evil snail. Michael Scott is using a simile. So if you're choosing to do this option, if you go into Canvas and you go to modules, go right underneath resources and click on honors credit, you'll see this right here. So I am not asking you to find an example for all of these. I'm asking you to pick one. That's literally, sorry, my hair is all crazy. That's all I'm asking you to do. And then you're going to give me the example. You're going to tell me what type of figurative language element it is, where you found it, and then tell me how do you know that that is what it is. And to give you some ideas of places you could look on social media, song lyrics, TV shows, or movie quotes, in a book, basically anywhere that you find entertainment. So that is up. It's due on January 14th. So if you want to get honors credit for that, just go ahead and do that. But that should be it for week 16. So if you have any questions, please let me know.